Welcome everyone to our career fair. This event is hosted by the Youth Economics Initiative, and today we're joined by 4 professionals who will be sharing their insights and experiences about their careers. Okay. So before we get started, let's go over some norms first. So first of all, please have your camera on if you can. All our speakers have their cameras on too, so having our cameras on is the least we can do to welcome them. And also keep your microphones muted until you're given the okay during our Q&A session. And during that time, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please raise your hand first, and then we'll call on you for you to unmute yourself. And this kind of ties into our second norm, which is staying engaged throughout the session. Since you've already set aside an hour for this, you might as well make the most out of it. And thirdly, please keep all chat messages appropriate, or else we might have to remove you, and we really don't want to do that. So yes, okay. And finally, yeah, have a good time today. Next up, Cheryl, our COO, will tell everyone a bit more about our organization.
Yeah, okay. So basically, we're the Youth Economics Initiative. We're the ones hosting the event. And essentially what we are is like we're a nonprofit, and we're essentially a chain of high school economics clubs. So what we do is like we host a lot of competitions like Econ Bowl, Econ Olympiad, and then we just try to like create opportunities to explore like business, economics, and like finance. Yeah. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, so our event is divided into 2 parts. In the first part, our speakers will give us a short introduction about their careers, including a rundown of what a typical day looks like for them. And during the second half, we'll be opening the floor up to Q&A, and we can either ask questions through the chat or by directly unmuting and speaking. Alrighty, now the best part, introducing our speakers. So today we're joined by Arisa, who's a revenue accounting manager at Facebook. We have Leona, a business strategist at Walmart's corporate side. We also have Suraj, a former consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, and Dr. Davies, an economist and distinguished fellow of FEE's faculty network. So yeah, thank you. Thank you guys so much for being here with us today, and let's get straight into our questions. So our questions for today are telling us about your job, what you do, and why you chose your career pathway, what a day in your life looks like, some of the challenges that you might face on your job, and whether or not this was always your dream career. So I think we can go around. Arisa, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure, no problem. And thank you so much, guys, for having me here. I think this is a wonderful opportunity, and it's a really great thing that you're doing. And I definitely have thought, you know, when I was a high school student, if I had this opportunity, like I would have been excited for it. So I'm really glad that you guys are doing this, and thank you so much for having me. Just to tell you guys a little bit about myself, my name's Arisa. I majored in economics at UC Davis, and currently, as it says here, I'm currently a revenue accounting manager at Facebook. And just a little bit about my background and why I decided to choose an econ major. So my background is a little bit non-traditional. My background, like my accounting background, is a little bit non-traditional. I will say one of the best parts about having an econ degree that it is a very flexible degree. As you can see, there's 4 of us here speaking today, which is very different, like where we all have econ majors, but you know, like our career paths are very like different. So I will say that's one of the best things about having an econ degree. And you know, when I was in college thinking about, you know, the future and what I eventually wanted to do for my career, I always knew I liked working with numbers. financials, numbers, something like that. So that was always top of mind for me, but I wasn't sure exactly how, I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to make that happen. So initially, when I first got out of college, I thought, oh, I'm interested in becoming a financial advisor. So I actually started my career out in retail banking. So if you've ever been to like a bank, like if you've ever walked into like a Bank of America or like Wells Fargo, you'll probably see, bank employees sitting out the side, like at the desks. And those people typically, they will help customers who come in with, like opening new accounts or and also helping them like with any like issues they might have on their account. One thing I did not like about that, one aspect I did not like about retail banking is that retail banking is a very sales heavy job. And that was something that I was not comfortable doing. Just like personal preference is, just based on personal preference. So I would say if I could give you guys one advice, like think about like your personality, what you can see yourself doing on a day-to-day basis. Like if picking up the phone and making like a cold call to someone makes you feel uncomfortable, then probably, something like sales isn't for you. But after that, I did another role. I got out of retail banking and I went into payment operations. So payment operations is kind of like a hybrid role between like supporting people make payments, basically. It's like kind of like customer service and operational. It's kind of a blend, but it is a very niche role. Typically, you'll find payment operations type roles with companies that, basically deal with like money movement. So at the time I thought, hey, I actually want to try accounting. I didn't know going into it what it was going to be like, but I knew at the time, like, hey, every company needs an accountant. So that was kind of like my journey. Like if I say like, I don't want to say it was accidental, but like it was something that I would have never expected when I was going to school. And then in a little bit about like day in the life. So a job of an accountant, right, is to make sure, really at the end of the day, it's for us to make sure that like any companies, like whatever company you work for, that their financials are correct. So companies release their financial statements typically on like or all public companies in the US, they release their financial statements on a quarterly basis. And a lot of people use that to make investment decisions. So, like if I wanted to buy stock in Facebook, I could go online and look up the financial statements of Facebook to figure out like, hey, is this a company that I actually want to invest in, or is this a company that like isn't maybe doing so well? These financial statements also allow like management to make decisions about, hey, like maybe for Facebook, and this is just an example. So, but like maybe for Facebook, maybe, the Instagram platform is doing better than Facebook. So then, it kind of helps support the business, like whether we want to invest more in a certain area of the business versus another area of the business. Some of the challenges in the accounting role right now is accounting is very much moving towards automation. So if you think about like 10, 20 years back in the day, everything in the accounting world was done like, before computers, really, like everything was done manually, right? Like pencils and paper. So, and, like as technology evolves, like, we're moving things, everything is done like virtually or online now. And as part of that, a lot of these like repetitive tasks that, you typically see in a job of an accountant, like that is either getting automated or outsourced. So that people are able to focus on like, more like, instead of focusing on these tasks where you're basically doing the same thing every day, you're able to meaningfully contribute through your ideas and thoughts. So I would say that one of the challenges in the accounting world is definitely around like automation. And then the other piece that's key to any career like you might have in accounting is you're going to go through typically every company, most companies, if they're big enough, they'll go through like a financial audit every year. You probably heard of like the term like audit or auditors. But basically this is like a third party that comes in to check to make sure your financials are actually, that your financials are actually correct. And maybe there's like, just to make sure that, like there's no fraud going on, or somebody didn't make a like a huge mistake and some numbers are not reflected correctly. So that's another big part of accounting as well in my day-to-day. Hopefully I covered everything, and I can take questions like later, I think during the Q&A session, if you guys want to learn more. So thank you.
Yeah, that was really interesting hearing about how you like switched so many different jobs before you finally ended up at accounting. And accounting is honestly one of like the more overlooked jobs, I guess, because it's not as popular in like most people's eyes, but it's actually really important.
I agree. Like a lot of people, when they think about finance, they typically tend to think like, oh, like FP&A, so that's like financial planning, right? Like typically that's what's considered like, like the sexy job in finance. And accounting is definitely something that's a little bit, might not be so, I don't want to say not as cool, but the main, like really the difference between a job and like FP&A or finance is like FP&A is more like forward looking. So it's about making budgets, like projections, basically where is the company going, right? Whereas accounting is more about what happened now and what happened in the past, so that, like the financial planning team can use that information to make a decision about where to go forward. So that's kind of the, like, distinction. If you've ever heard, like, if you've ever wondered, like, what's different between FP&A and accounting. So.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. And Leona, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Leona. So I grew up in the Fremont area. I actually graduated from James Logan High School in 2014 and then went to Washington University in St. Louis, where I double majored in the business school in econometrics and supply chain management, and then double minored in the College of Arts and Sciences for poetry and American culture studies. So all over the place. And then after graduation, I worked at a PR agency doing corporate crisis management. And then a couple of months later, was recruited to join the category management program at Walmart e-commerce. Something not included in like my working bio, but what I'm happy to talk about later in the Q&A is that I work full-time, but I also freelance quite a bit outside of that. So I'm the editor-in-chief of both a cultural platform called TaiwaneseAmerican.org and a retail editorial community called Bobble House. I also do social media management and pitch deck design for early stage ventures. So a lot going on. So in terms of like, is my day job my dream career? Not really. Very often that's difficult to find, right? But the aggregate of what I get to do, I think lends towards most, or if not all, of my professional and personal goals. So I'm busy, but I'm really happy having so much variety in my life. My day job, though, is I work as a strategy manager on the marketplace growth team at Walmart e-commerce. Like what that means is that, so Walmart essentially, as you probably know, developed this brick and mortar mega retailer playbook. Any sort of like business education will have this in their curriculum. This case study of how Walmart disrupted smaller retail ecosystems, centralized them to amass economies of scale and scope, improved economic efficiencies and bargaining power, and then passed on those cost savings to the customer through this EDLP, everyday low pricing model. And then today, 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart. So that scale and that impact is sort of undeniable. The retail landscape, though, has been changing. And so Amazon's probably the best example of this overwhelming influence and shift towards e-commerce. And like, to be real, Walmart was really slow to act on that. So Walmart was launched in 2007. And then that was like a decade after Amazon had launched in the 90s. And it was very limited in scope at the time as well, and really only served the purpose of allowing customers to like order online and pick up stuff in stores. And then Walmart.com didn't really scale until 2016 with the acquisition of Jet. So I work on the marketplace side of the e-commerce business, and marketplace is an e-commerce channel where sellers use our platform, so Walmart.com, to reach our customers, and they set pricing, shipping, all of that. And we don't own any of their inventory or content. Other examples of marketplaces you might be familiar with are like Amazon, eBay, Etsy. having a strong marketplace channel is a really critical way for a Walmart e-commerce to scale. So that's not without its challenges. So that's what I work on here at Walmart. We have a very customer-centric philosophy and approach where it's always like the customer comes first, always. And I adapt that in my role where the sellers who use the Walmart Marketplace platform to generate sales, like they are my customer and the platform is my product. And I help strategize ways to grow and improve both. So on the seller side, that might be rolling out seller incentives, setting smart financial targets, consulting them on retail fundamentals. And then on the product side, that's actually improving how they're interacting with the platform, the different reporting and metrics they can access, the different programs that they can opt into to really help them drive sales. So anything that you're curious about retail, e-com, all of that, I'd love to chat about in addition to like balancing stuff that you're interested in and what it's like to have full-time work, but also freelance and things that are, you don't get fulfilled through your primary job. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, Walmart e-commerce. I've shopped on Walmart online too. And yeah, I think it's really important to have like both the physical part and the online part, especially since people don't really like going out in stores to shop anymore. People like sitting in front of their computers and buying stuff. Yeah. Suraj, would you like to share?
Sure. Hi everyone. It's so great to see you all. Let's see. I went to undergrad at Penn, and I did a dual degree program. I got a bachelor's in engineering and a bachelor's from Wharton, the business school, in finance. I did not go into college thinking I wanted to be a consultant. I didn't even know that consulting was a profession until I got to college. I wanted to go in to be an engineer, and I soon learned about consulting. I was really attracted to it because of the problem solving. It's just lots of different problems that you're helping companies solve, and that rotates every couple of months. So I ended up interning at BCG when I was a junior in college. I spent my sophomore summer interning in finance at BlackRock. And then I interned at BCG as a junior, and I joined them full time. And I was at BCG both before and after I went to business school. I really enjoyed my time there. I went into consulting partly for the problem solving and partly because some of my mentors told me it was one of the best professional trainings you can get. And I really thought that was true. I learned a ton about analytics, client management, people leadership, which have helped me in all of my jobs since consulting. I've since left consulting to do other things. So clearly not my dream career, but I think it was a great place to start my career. And I think a number of my friends are still in it and they're really enjoying it. I think it's really hard to describe what a day in the life looks like because that's really variable from project to project and depending on what your role is on that project. But I think the best way to describe it is you're usually working with a client to help them solve a problem that is not that you know more about the topic. In fact, I think consulting is very humbling in that regard. You're never the smartest person in the room about that client's business. So for example, if I was working with Leona or Arissa, like I will never know more about Walmart or Facebook's business than they do. But you're bringing capacity and bringing outside thinking to problems that they don't have staff to solve because they're either like a merger or an acquisition that's a one-off or a specific type of problem. And so you're working really closely with the client to do that type of analysis, and you're with them for somewhere between 3 and 6 months, and then you move on to the next project. Excited to answer any questions you all have.
Is it true that in consulting you have to travel a lot?
I think that varies a ton and probably is going to change because of COVID. So I've had projects where I traveled a lot every week. One of my last projects before I left, I was based in Washington, D.C. and traveling to Seattle and Geneva, one or the other almost every week. And then I've had projects where I never traveled and my client was local, or my client, we had a long relationship with them and so would only go when we had a key meeting or check-in. But most consulting pre-COVID involved quite a bit of travel. I think that's going to be ramped down post-COVID because people have found you can do the work pretty easily not being there. And then I also think a lot of big consulting firms are starting to think about their climate change and their carbon footprint, which is mostly air travel.
I see. And you mentioned that you were an engineer first. Like, what specifically made you want to make the switch into like a more econ and like business focused? Is there like a great moment or something?
There wasn't a clear moment. So I did both degrees at the same time. So I actually thought the business degree would help me on the engineering side. But then as I started exploring engineering careers, I learned like you don't really have as much variety in the work you do. You end up you specialize and you work on the same types of problems over and over. And that was just less exciting to me, and consulting presented a different option. And so I ended up going that route. I still miss the engineering pieces every now and then. And so I end up doing that as a hobby on the side. A little bit like Leona, I think about it as like you have a portfolio of different experiences and you sort of build the ideal through all of the different things you can do. So I like the way she approached that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And finally, we have Anthony or Dr. Davies. Would you like to share about your career and experiences?
Sure. Thank you for being here. I studied economics. I was an economics major as an undergraduate and double minored in math and philosophy. As a sophomore in college, largely because I was bored, my friend and I started a software company, and that was my first company. It ended up going through several iterations, and then subsequently after I'd left it, became publicly traded, a $2 billion company. Unfortunately, I had nothing to do with it at that point. When I was a senior in college, I applied for both law school and for a PhD in economics. And it was a toss-up right to the end, which I was going to do. And the decision came down to the fact that law school was going to charge me money to go for a degree, and the PhD Econ would pay me money to go for the degree. So I went for the Econ. I liked it so much that I just kind of naturally fell into becoming a professor, because if you like school and you go as far as you can, there's no more school. What do? You go and teach. And so, you get your summers off the same as you do when you're a student. So I've been an economics professor for 20 years. And during that period have simultaneously been a serial entrepreneur. So I've left academia several times to go start companies and then gone back to academia later. Currently, I'm kind of in academia mostly. I have a podcast that's been going on for 3 years now. I've done hundreds of videos. I've authored books for popular press. Yeah, I do the research and stuff for academia, but then I write a lot for non-academics. So what does a day look like? The thing that has driven my career development is the fact that I get bored really easily, and so I want lots of interesting things to do. So, for example, just today, I started out the morning, I graded papers, I made PowerPoint slides for lectures on Monday. I had a radio interview, someone asking about unemployment and inflation. I wrote an op-ed that's going to be coming out next week in some newspapers across the country. I researched taxes for an academic article that I'm writing, and then managed my social media accounts, because all of this stuff that we're, I'm doing, the podcast and the videos and whatnot, need to go out, and I have people asking questions, they answer, that sort of thing. So that to me is the ideal day, to do all these variety of things. Now, a lot of people, when I tell them things like this, they get interested in the entrepreneur side, right? Because professors are boring. So I'll tell you a little bit about the entrepreneur side. So my first company started as a sophomore in college. My next one, I started after I finished my PhD. Parabon computation, which you may have run across some of the stuff they do. They made it was a 1-season television series based on Parabon, but the big thing they do now, it's a supercomputing company. The big thing they do now is they'll take genetic material from a crime scene, and they can run their genetic material through the supercomputer and build a picture of an actual picture of the person whose genetic material this is. So they use these things to solve crimes. And so I'm no longer with them, but I was with them in the first 5 years of their existence, building up the company. I started a nonprofit a few years ago, and with that, I go around the country giving lectures to high school students about economics. And I go with my friend who's a political scientist, and he talks about government. And that's kind of what I do now, until I get bored with this, and I'll go find something else.
I see. Well, what made you like continuously interested in economics, since like you, as you mentioned, get bored really easily?
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. And it's why I encourage people who are inquisitive about the world to study economics, because one of the wonderful things it teaches you is to think critically, think analytically about the world. And we're generalists as economists. So ERISA is kind of an exception going into accounting. Economists don't typically do that, although you can. Generally, you find them in jobs that carry the title analyst. And there's someone who the business hires because they want them to think about things as opposed to, doing things.
I see. That's really interesting, like all your past experiences and like now what you're doing as a professor. Yeah, that was really cool to hear about. And we have some questions in the chat actually that I think would be great for us to go into. So our first question is, if you're a beginner in economics, what's the best way to start getting into it? And I know that like all of you guys have had like different experiences with econ, maybe like some during high school perhaps, and mostly during college. So I guess we can go around and share like what initially got you into econ, and like what was like the most research, like the deepest you went into it, if that makes sense. Or you could just give your own take on your experiences on econ too.
I'll jump in because my answer is simple. I didn't know what economics was. I studied it because my mother told me to. Seriously, yeah, that's why I studied econ.
You can't go wrong with that. Arissa, would you like to share kind of?
Yeah, I can go next. I mean, frankly, it has been a while for me, but my first exposure with econ was probably in the senior year of high school. I think we had to take, like econ was part of the required curriculum back then, and that was my first exposure to econ. I didn't really start enjoying, what I was learning from econ until I've actually moved on to college, where you kind of like, you start building on the basics. So in high school, you probably learn about like, hey, like what's the supply and demand curve? But in college, you get to like kind of expand on that. And one of the things that really interested me when I was at UC Davis is there was a course on econ history where you kind of take, like economic trends and analysis, like, and compare that with like, like world history. So it was like a US history, like econ US history class. So, but then we basically, did deep dives onto like, like how did economics impact history? Like as, like with like the Industrial Revolution or, like the Civil War. So that was a super interesting class course for me. Probably my favorite econ class during school that, still I like look back to and think fondly of. And I think some of the challenges and like, the analysis that were being done there was super interesting to me. And I love getting that like different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a question specifically directed at you, Arissa. So okay. Cheryl asked, for accounting, there's a notion that it's boring. And do you personally find any parts of your job boring? And if people who do accounting don't usually study econ, what do they typically study?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can take that question. I'm going to start with the bottom part of this question first, and I'm going to be very honest with you guys. So, as Dr. Davies said, typically when you go into accounting, you generally, most accountants don't major in economics. Like, that's a true statement. If you are serious about accounting, I recommend you major in accounting right away. And I can talk a little bit more about that. Like, if anybody has more questions about that, like, I know Jessica's going to be sharing all of our emails out, so I'm happy to do like a deeper dive. But my like high level take on it is, if you're serious about an accounting career, think about majoring in accounting, because what you study in college and how that will prep you for, like basically your first job is going to be very different versus what you learn from an econ major versus what you learn as an accounting major. So I will say that, like, that's one of the things that, like, if I could go back in time, I would probably, and knowing that I wanted to do accounting, that would probably be the path that I would have taken. But I will say, like, again, like, one of the beauties of the econ degree is it's extremely flexible. So even for people like me who didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do at that point in time, it's very forgiving, and I was able to step into it, accounting pretty seamlessly. So that's that. And then I definitely think, like, yes, there is kind of like a notion that, like, accounting might be boring. Like, when you think about like accountants and like TV shows, like, just think of someone like sitting by the computer, like crunching numbers. And if you do perform like the same tasks over and over and over again, yeah, of course that's going to get boring, right? But in accounting, like, there's a lot of career opportunities for you to move up. And really the people who, the people that are going to be doing those, like, same tasks over and over again, those are, going to be your entry level accountants. Maybe that's their first job out of college and they're just getting their foot wet, in the door. But as you stay, like, for, like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, like, you'll continue, there's growth opportunities where you'll kind of learn to move up and you will begin to play more of an oversight role. So what that means is, like, instead of you being the one to, like, do all the daily, like, repetitive stuff yourself, you will have a team for yourself, and you can, kind of support them. And your job will evolve so that instead of doing the same things over and over again, you'll be thinking through problems for your team. So, okay, maybe you have 2 people this year, but is the workload increasing? Is the business, planning on making an acquisition? Is the business coming up with a new product? Those are all things, like, questions that you'll have to consider from an accounting perspective. And your role will transition into more of like a management and leadership role. So I would say that it definitely gets better over time as you move up.
Yeah, makes sense. And going back to our first question, Leona, would you like to share how you got into econ?
So I started off in the business school, like an undergraduate business school program anyways, and you have a lot of introductory courses. And, like, quite frankly, like, econ didn't resonate with me, and it was something I really struggled with even in high school. And it didn't click with me until I took Econometrics, which is like the application of stats and econ, and then you apply those concepts to modeling for real life situations. Like, there's case studies you apply all of that math modeling to, and for me that was a more tangible way to understand the calculations I was running. So, like, I can do math all day, but, like, it doesn't make sense, like, how it translates into actionable insights until I took classes like that. And so I think that if the math intimidates you or you feel like it's too cut and dry, wait until it gets applied and you have a real use case for all of that. That's for me when it really became more interesting. But also, if math intimidates you and you're bad at math but want to pursue a business career, we use Excel. So, like, don't stress. There are tools to help you overcome all of that.
Yeah, I think the application part that you mentioned is pretty relatable, honestly, because, like, at school right now, most of the things we learn are just pure math almost. So yeah, I think getting the chance to apply math would really be interesting. Suraj, would you like to share what got you into econ?
Yeah, econ sort of was a core part of where I did my finance work at where all undergrad degrees are econ degrees, and so I sort of went into it because that was the way to get a business degree at Penn, and I really enjoyed it. It was the first time I was exposed to it. The classic Econ 101 and 102, micro and macro, and then I stayed along with it in other places. I think the nice thing about econ is that similar to like engineering and a few other degrees, like it presents a good framework on which you can go do a lot of thinking or a lot of different types of work, which you can see in this panel. So that's how I got into it. I did want to jump in on something on the accounting question for Arissa, which I would say like I'd add every job has really boring aspects. Like if you think about coders, they spend a lot of time checking, like debugging code. Engineers spend a lot of time doing boring things. And so I wouldn't let the stereotype of a job being boring get to you, because I think that's going to be true for any job at some point in time.
That's definitely true. And we also have another question. Yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna add one thing. I did start learning about econ in high school because I read a blog called Marginal Revolution, which surprisingly is still in existence, but that was the only thing like I did in high school related to econ, which like he talks about econ stuff, but also like food and restaurants, and applies some of his like markets analysis to that. So it's just an example of how wide that framework can get you.
Mm-hmm. And like speaking of like high school and college, like what was the biggest difference between like your high school econ experience and like college? Because I'm assuming you took a class in high school too, right? If it was a curriculum requirement or something.
For me?
Yes.
I actually didn't. My high school,
didn't.
I went to an engineering high school, so we did not have an econ requirement. Yeah.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so we have a question in the chat right now. For each profession, what are some of the interests supposed to be? So for an economist, would math be valuable? And are there any like characteristic traits that would make someone suitable for each of the jobs? I think we can go around with this one as well, since all the careers are different. We can start with Dr. Davies.
Sure. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question.
Okay, so the question is, for each profession, what are some of the interests supposed to be? So they have
some of
the interests supposed to be.
Oh, yeah. So for economics, if you don't like math, you're probably going to have problems. Now, there are a couple of universities in this country that teach what's called Austrian Economics, which approaches economics from a philosophical perspective. And the educations there are quite good. One of them is George Mason University. The other that I can think of off the top of my head is Hillsdale. And I'm sure there are a few others, but the Austrians that approach to economics is wonderful. Honestly, it gives you a broad understanding rooted in philosophy of economics. However, it's not common. The common approach is what we call the Chicago School, which requires a lot of mathematics. Leon talks about econometrics. That's my specialty as well. It's a tremendous amount of math. And I advise students, if you want to succeed well, I mean really well as an undergraduate, get a minor in math at the least. If you want to go on for graduate school, probably a double major would be better.
And this is like speaking like going into econ research, right?
Right. Yeah, that's if you want to go into economics. Yeah. Now, even if you want to stop at the undergraduate level and just get a job, typically, as I said earlier, typically, not always, but typically the job has the title analyst. It doesn't have the title economist. So it's kind of one of these weird things that people think you'll have your parents and aunts and uncles telling you why you're studying economics. There are no jobs in economics. People have that misperception because the title is typically analyst. And there, yeah, you're going to have to, as Leona said, Excel is your friend, but you got to know how to use it really well. You're going to have to be comfortable with math. You're not going to have to be a math major, but you are going to have to be comfortable doing it.
I see. And Arissa, would you like to add on? What do you think the interest for an accountant or like a potential accountant would have to be?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about accounting, really, there's like three things. So first is, like in order to be a successful accountant, like I would say problem solving is a big one. And this is mostly, this is mostly true for the Bay, but also like true everywhere. But, like, as you guys know, like there's a lot of startups in the Bay, and a lot of these, more established companies, they also have problems that need solving. One of those examples that I touched on a little bit earlier is like, hey, let's say I'm at Facebook and we decide to roll out a new product. I mean, this is hypothetical. There's no new product, I think, but like, so some of the questions then the accounting team might be asking is like, okay, so we have this new product. How do we account for it? How is the money moving for this product? Are we collecting money from anyone? Are we paying out money to anyone? And, how do we properly record that into our books so it's correct? And the other next piece I'm going to segue into is continuous learning. For accountants, for at least for the US, there's something called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. This is a set of like a huge like code book, basically, of like accounting rules that each company needs to follow. And by following these rules, it makes sure that like all of these different companies, there's some consistency between the financial statements. So that, when I look at the financials for Apple and when I look at the financial statements for Amazon, I'm able to compare them. And I'm comparing like, apples to apples. Sorry for the lame pun, but so that's another thing. As part of accounting, one of the things that you're going to want to do as part of your early career is get yourself a CPA. So that's an exam that most people take, and typically can take, like there's 4 sections, but typically takes, folks like a year or 2 years to pass through all 4 sections. So it's definitely something, that requires like a huge like commitment from everybody. So like maybe like, if you don't think, that's something that, is like your cup of tea, I mean, sure, you can still go into accounting, but would definitely recommend everybody who goes into accounting to try to pursue that CPA. And then lastly, I would say as an accountant, like, and like also as a hiring manager, is I would want to see folks that are detail oriented. At the end of the day, like you're going to be part of the team that's going to be responsible for the financials of the company that you work for. And, so we obviously want to make sure that our numbers are accurate at the end of the day. So I would say those 3 are the most important things from me.
I see. Thank you for sharing. And Leona, what would you say some of the interests for like your career would be?
Yeah, so I think my role is a lot closer to like the analyst situation that was described, and not like a real economist. And table stakes for doing well, just like good business sense, resilience to chaos, especially like in my role, like Walmart specifically is very well known, but marketplace is very new. And like between you and me, we're literally building as we go. So you have to be able to set up checkpoints and ways to measure something you've never had to measure before, ways to define success and failure for things you've not done before. If that excites you, that's great. And that you are comfortable without a lot of structure, that's the kind of role that might be a good fit for you. But if you need, more of a framework within which to operate, maybe something like accounting that has very explicit rules will be more suited for you. So I wouldn't say you have to take a specific class or major in anything specific to do what I do. I think I'm on my team, I'm the only one with like a real econ background. but just like the willingness to grow, to learn, and to have what feels like common sense, I think will get you pretty far.
I see. That's some very valuable insights. And Suraj, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone said about econ in general. I would say for consulting, being able to have like organized and structured thinking is really important. And then also just being able to just like quickly get up to speed on a new subject matter is really important. And so, you know, when I started, my start class had folks who majored in English. We had an arts major. We had a couple of engineers, a couple of business folks, a couple of pure econ degrees. And so I don't think there's like a specific degree that's required, though the finance and econ background really helped me, especially on the analytics side. Really what Anthony said around the quantitative pieces were super important for my career. And so that helped me, but I know folks who majored in English and did just as well. So I don't think it's a firm requirement.
I see. Okay, so Davik, if that's how you pronounce your name, had a question that he wanted to ask all of our panelists today.
Sure, yeah. I go by Dave, but Mr. Patel, Mr. Davies, Ms. Chen, and Ms. Harada, thank you for your time today. So this is kind of a modern question, you know, something that I think will spark a pleasant conversation. So I'll also put it in the chat in case you have to reference it. But what do you think about the current economy? Like, is a recession coming sooner than later, in your opinion, even though we're all predicting at this point, and especially due to COVID and all the, you know, all the impacts that are happening? Has this impacted, you know, maybe the economy in a positive or negative light, or maybe even your job outlook in terms of, you know, are companies hiring more of your position, less of your position, things like that? And, you know, how do you think the economy will evolve? You know, I know numerous tech giants such as Tesla and like SpaceX, and for example, Musk, right, thinking about taxing robots. Do you think we're going to evolve in a more digital and robotic way and having humans, and like, you know, we're developing humanoids already? And do you think humans will have a lesser role in the future?
Yeah, so I think we can go through real quick and answer in about like 30 seconds to a minute. Just your really, really brief thoughts on it. Dr. Davies.
I wanted to hear from the other three first before I said something. So
Someone
I get to
wanna
hold back.
go first?
Because I don't exist in the real world. They do. I want to hear what they have to say. Then I'll tell you what I think.
Okay, Suraj, I saw that you unmuted. Do you want to go first?
Only because I feel like this question itself can be an entire podcast series. I think that I am not at all certified to say whether or not we have a recession coming or something. I'd be much, much richer if I could answer those types of questions. I think just the thing about like the robotics and things, you are all spending your Saturday afternoon in high school thinking about your future career. I would not worry about like where the job market will be in 20 years. You will be fine if you're spending the time now thinking about this. So like, that was my first piece of advice. I think like robots will have an impact on our career, obviously, on our world, but I think there'll be parts, I think all of what we do at this point in our careers, all the panelists, is no longer just like mechanical work that's repetitive. There is some analysis required, and a lot of it at that point later on in your career is interacting with other humans and thinking about more than just what the answer is, but what the conversation around the answer is. So if you take Arissa's example around like you're launching a new product and you have these questions around whether or not you're going to be charging customers or not charging customers, there's a little bit about knowing what questions to ask, a little bit about knowing what to do with the answers, but there's a big part of the work is knowing how to frame the questions and how to navigate all of like the internal processes at Facebook. So you're getting the information you need and people understand why you're asking that question and how you're improving that work over time. There's no way robots are going to be able to do that because that's people work at some point. And so like is going to be fine. There's always going to be need for that type of understanding and work. And so I think like that's the part I think that most programs that I've been in don't spend enough time teaching folks around how to interact and build relationships with people and how to manage those parts of life. And so I think that's the part I would say if I could go back and do something differently, knowing where the future is going now, I'd spend more time thinking about things like that.
I see. And I think you kind of covered this question. And since we actually do have in the chat specific questions directed at our other speakers, I wanted to get to those first, actually. So someone asked, Leona, could you advise on any trustworthy online courses on like self-studying business strategy, if you have had any experience with that? Or have your experiences mostly been like just at school?
I think most of my experiences have honestly been at school, but I can recommend like books that I found helpful, and I'll send a list to Jessica to pass out if that's okay. I'm like having trouble thinking of them off the top of my head.
Okay. And we also have another question directed at Leona, you as well, and also Dr. Davies. So what types of math are most needed in econometrics?
For me, it was a lot of stats and stats modeling. They call it like quantitative analysis and modeling in college, but that's something that's completely different way of thinking than things like calculus. And I think that was really fundamental for me and being able to like understand econometrics as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. Get as much stats as you can. And notice the stats that you take from a business department are going to be very different than the stats you take from a math department. For econometrics, I would say if you can only take one or the other, go with the business stats, but if you can, take them both. If you're thinking about graduate school, you need up through linear algebra. Econometrics at the graduate level is entirely linear algebra.
I see. And Dr. Davies, we have another question for you actually from Derek. Are there any situations to which the philosophical approach to economics can be more suitably applied than the mathematical approach and vice versa? And also,
very much.
The prevailing mathematical approach to economics account for certain unpredictable situations in reality or situations in which myriad variables exist? Well,
yeah, Austrian economists are really, really good at communicating economic ideas to non-economists. Economists generally are very bad at that. We live in our heads, we build these models, and you ask an economist some question, he's going to come back to you and talk about elasticities and all kinds of things that are going to make your eyes glaze over. The Austrians are trained to think about economics not from the perspective of mathematics, but from the perspective of human behavior. So if you're looking for someone who's good at communicating to non-economists, that's who you want. In terms of conclusions they come to largely the same sorts of conclusions. So it's not like the Austrians are going to think one thing and the Chicago people are going to think something else. It's two different ways of thinking about the same topic.
I see. That was a pretty good explanation. And we still have a few more questions that we can go through. Let me see real quick. This one's for Leona as well. What are the best places to intern at aiming at become a business strategist? And if they come from Central Asia, is an opportunity to pursue a career of like a business strategist in the US? So I guess what they're asking is like, would there be lots of opportunities for them to like come over and just dive into this career?
Okay, so in terms of like where to gain experience, I think for me, it was really important to me that I gain as wide of a variety of experience as possible before I like committed it to anything full time. And so that's very contrary to like a lot of career advice you might get from a career consultant, where they say like pick one path and do really well in it. And that's great because it becomes very apparent to recruiters like what you want to do because you have such a well-established pattern of doing the right things to get there. I didn't do that. So I was at a startup for one of the summers. My second summer, I took time off. I wrote a book of poetry. And then my third summer, I went very corporate. So I worked for Nestle Purina. And that gave me a sense of like, if I go somewhere that's like totally corporate and structured, will I be happy? And it's kind of weird that I ended up at Walmart doing something very not structured, but it gives you a sense of like, if I tried these different things, like what do they all tell me about the career that will be the best match for me? And you also get a lot of insights on how things are run at that scale and scope, right? And so imagine working at like a huge CPG company, all of the insights you'll have about retail behavior, about consumer behavior, about financial planning analysis, because you have that scale to work with. In terms of like opportunities for people from Asia, I think there's two parts of that. One is like, what tribal or specific knowledge can I contribute? And there's plenty. You can contribute knowledge regardless of whatever background you come from, because it's specific to you and you'll be valuable in that way. The second might be like logistically, like visas and sponsorships and things like that. And I think that varies quite a bit between companies and depending on like the political climate. If you wanted to work with me, for example, I know that visa sponsorships is something that we're very generous about. And so as you start planning out your career and talking to different recruiters, that might be a conversation that you can have with them.
I see. And I think we have time for one last question. Let's see here. There's a lot. Kabir, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So I was just, sorry. I was just wondering if you had any like specific book recommendations for someone who wanted to get into economics or didn't really know much about economics.
And I think Fiona talked about her book list, which we can send out. But does anyone else have any book recommendations?
I highly recommend my recent book, Cooperation and Coercion. Buy one for yourself, buy one for your parents, your aunts and uncles. It's also an audiobook.
Nice. And Arissa, any book recommendations or anything that helped you along the way, resources?
Nothing specific to econ, but if you guys want to know more about accounting or any literature, I'm happy to point you to them.
Okay. And Suraj?
I'm gonna just throw out a random book that I found really helpful, which was An Economist Gets Lunch.
I've never heard of that, but that sounds interesting. And I think like one of the most like popular intro to econ books is like Freakonomics. So I think that would be pretty nice as well. Okay, so right now.
Awesome. Also, wait, one more thing. I think I joined the meeting a little bit late. So where would be like, is there like an actual list of what Leona talked about, or was that something
Leona will send her list to me, and then I'll send that out in an email to everyone.
Awesome,
So,
thank you.
Cheryl, do you want to screen share to the last slide? Okay, so this is it for our questions for today. I know that there's some that we didn't get to, but if you fill out our feedback form, we'll be able to email to you the emails of all our awesome panelists today. And I'll also be able to send out the resources that any of our speakers sent to me later. So please fill out that feedback form. And I also have another one from the Foundation for Economic Education. So Dr. Davies' organization, and it'd be awesome if you guys could fill out the feedback form for them as well. Yeah, so it's in the chat, and thank you guys so much for coming today. And we hope that you gained a lot of insight into these various career pathways. Yeah, so our panelists were awesome today. And I personally learned a lot, didn't know that there were so many like small niche things. And yeah, thank you guys for coming again.
Thank you so much for hosting and having me. Really great opportunity. And if you guys have any follow-up questions or anything, I think they're going to be, I think Jessica's going to be sharing out our emails. So if you have any questions, anything about accounting or working at Facebook, I'll be sure to get back to you if you do. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.